I'll let my colleagues introduce themselves. Lori, would you like to begin?
Sure. Hi, I'm Lori Sandell. I'm the Vice President of Strategic Services here at the Impact Group. Been here for almost a year. Spent most of my time in public education as a teacher and an administrator.
Stephen?
Yeah, hi guys. I'm the digital marketer here at the Impact Group. I help out with a lot of like social media and different types of campaigns. I was the one that put together this webinar and invited you all here. So thank you all for coming.
Thank you. And Phil?
Hi, I'm Phil Herman. I've been with the Impact Group for just under 2 months now, making the transition from public education like Lori, where I was a school administrator for 22 years, 11 of those as a school superintendent, most recently in Hudson City Schools.
Cool. Well, guys, welcome for being here today. We are going to talk about strategic planning. This is going to be a crash course on strategic planning. What is it? I imagine you are here because you have some interest at some level. We have a lot of boards of development and disabilities. We have some private providers with us today. We have a city and I believe a school district as well. That's wonderful. Okay, a strategic plan. Why in the world should we do this in the first place, right? A strategic plan, we believe, has three big purposes. The first one is you need to genuinely understand what your community wants. There's a lot of circumstances where we have a lot of smart people, but they get in a room and we're deciding what that community wants to do. Let's face it, you are representing the constituents you had, your residents. What do they want? If you want this to actually be a successful strategic plan, it genuinely has to be their plan. And we're going to talk about how to do that. So one of the things you have to have is it has to be their plan. The second one is it has to be actionable. Everybody raise their hand if you've ever been a part of a strategic plan. I have in past lives where you do the plan, everybody's exhausted, and then 18 months later, somebody says, what happened to the plan? It's in that yellow binder. Did anybody see this thing? You're like, yeah, I think it's over there. The whole point of a strategic plan is that it's actionable. Who is doing what, when, and is it measurable? Who is doing what, when, and is it measurable? So the idea of this is your community is on board and it's measurable. And the third component, we believe, and this is one of the ones that's most often overlooked, your crew, your staff needs to be energized. Also, who has been a part of a strategic plan? At the end of that strategic planning process, you're all exhausted. It's like training for a marathon, but your body is so wrecked by the end of your training, you can't actually run the marathon. The whole point of the strategic planning process is to get ready. So at the end of the process, your crew should be energized. They should be united. They should be excited for this mission they're ready to go on. So it's genuinely the communities, it's actionable, and your crew is energized. Those are the three big reasons we believe you need a strategic plan. Phil, Lori, you guys have anything on that before we get going?
I've been a part of the binder system. We spend all that time and it ends up on a shelf somewhere. So we want to make sure that doesn't happen. Absolutely.
Okay, so let's also talk a little high level here. There's really two main ways you can do a strategic plan. One way is to have a standing committee. And there's not right or wrong. We just have our preference, having done it for many, many years now. One is a standing committee. So you have your standing committee of, these are the individuals in your community who are very involved with your board of DD or your school or your city. And they meet and then they meet again and they meet again. And it's like a series of processes in which this one group kind of sees the process through. That's not a bad system, but honestly, we don't particularly like that system. And here's why. Your usual suspects show up for everything. Let's face it, you have your 10 to 20 people who show up for everything. The idea of the strategic plan is that it needs to be a broader representation of your community. So we believe that having that one standing committee, it just isn't that tenable, because once again, who's going to show up for multiple meetings? Who's going to miss a bunch of time with their family? Who's going to miss? It's going to be people that are already invested. It's hard to get that group. So we don't advocate that way. The other broad system is you have systems in place in which you bring in different groups. You bring in your senior leadership, and then you bring in community members, a focus group at a time. So let's say you've got parents. You bring them in for a session. You gather the data. You then excuse them. You do that with community leaders. You do that with others, and they're invested, they're excited, but they're meeting with you one time, and then they disperse, and then you can create the rest of the system. Why is this also important? We've seen some of these community groups go rogue, right? So you've got your community group now that's let's say the first model, once again, the same group keeps meeting. If they have a different direction in mind than you do, And if your strategic planning committee says we want to build facilities and you guys don't, or we want to do this and you don't, now you got a problem, because you have the official group in your community that now has the microphone that may be going a different direction. So we don't believe in empowering that group in a negative way. We believe in gathering data in a more diverse way. Does that make sense? Okay. Let's talk here a little bit about the process itself, a process that we believe works. So once again, you're trying to gather and create a plan that is representative of the community, is actionable, and has your crew excited. The first phase is it's necessary to get together with your board or your oversight committee to understand their vision, their strengths and weaknesses, and the vision. I'm not sure if, Lori, if you'd like to speak about this first piece.
Sure. So we get together with your board of directors, your board of education, your city managers, whomever it is, as a oversight committee. And we start with really understanding your vision and your mission of your organization. We review that. We help you maybe hone that if you need it. But then we go into a SWOT analysis. So we spend some time really understanding the strengths, the weaknesses, the opportunities, and the threats of the district or organization. After we do all of that, we then wrap that session up with a nice cultural piece to talk about cultural aspirations for your district or organization, and then the behavioral expectations that you need in order to have the culture that you're looking for. So we meet and do vision and mission. We talk about the SWOT analysis, strengths, opportunities, weaknesses, and threats. And then we also do the cultural piece at the very end.
So that's phase one. You do that with your board or your oversight committee. And you also did that exact same meeting with your senior staff. The idea is you want to see where they're linked, maybe where they're not quite linked. It's really interesting to do those meetings separately. So you gather those pieces. Once again, our vision, 3 years, what does victory look like? Our strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats really gives us a baseline. And then that cultural vision, we believe that any culture that is thriving is not accidental. It's a very intentional, thoughtful process. And we need to understand what that is if we're going to get there. So that's phase one. Phase two now, and once again, other firms do this as well. This is our process, but just to kind of explain to you the way this process works, if you're in a more general sense, or you're gathering data. So you need to gather data. One way is to do a community. We do an online survey to gather data. Phil, would you want to address the survey at all?
Sure. So in regard to the the survey, we're really reaching out to stakeholders ultimately, and we work with the each school district, city, DD, whoever we're working with, to determine who needs to be involved in that. But we're reaching out and trying to get perspectives from a really broad cross section. This is what Tom was talking about before in terms of the importance of having input from many different individuals, so we can arrive at themes and overarching perspectives that help us form a logical plan, as opposed to, again, receiving that really small group of local input from a relatively small group. And this survey enables us to reach out to a broad spectrum.
So you got the survey, which you're pushing out not only with any email or any things you have, but then throughout any web, social media, the rest. You're buying Facebook spots. You're getting as much data as possible. Surveys. The next piece is focus groups. You got to talk to your community. This is something we advocate doing on a regular basis. What is your community thinking? Face it, when we're talking to our community members, a lot of times we're presenting something, right? We're presenting this, we're presenting that. There is such therapeutic power in going to your community members and have them in a group and to say, how are we doing? What are some things we're doing well? What are some things we're doing really well to serve you and your families? What are some things we could be doing better? How can we support you and your families? What are some things we should start doing? What are some things we should stop doing? How do you want to be communicated with? Just these questions, wow, do you get great stuff. You get such good stuff, because remember that survey is necessary. It's like a broad information, but it's kind of shallow, basically surveys. And now this qualitative piece with the focus groups, you get good stuff. And we advocate, if it's in the DD world, we want to talk to parents and guardians. If it's school world, parents and guardians. In the DD world, individuals served. In the school world, students. Same in the city, we want to talk to citizens and such. But then you've got your you've got your parents, you've got your students, you have your teachers, you have your staff. We want to make sure that not just your teaching staff, but your whole ancillary staff that serves people are a part of that. We found great success in the community with addressing groups that exist. I think if you've all tried to engage your community before, it's not, you can get parents and guardians and things, and that's reasonable. It's hard to get community members who aren't really associated with your board or with your school. We found enormous success going to the Rotary meeting or Kiwanis or Friends of the Library or something. So I think a lot of you have been to Rotary or Kiwanis or Lions type meetings. In the middle, there's like a 35-minute period where someone presents. What you want to do is use that period of time to just, instead of presenting something, you're simply asking questions. We're here representing the local board of DD or the school district. And man, we really want to hear your thoughts. And it's good stuff because these are the people that are making up your community. So all of those different focus groups, you gather that data. Now, here's an important caveat. Once again, whether it's us or somebody else, you need to have a third party running those focus groups. Why? Because people are generally nice. And if you're the superintendent or if you're someone asking the question, we found most of the times people say things nice because they want to be nice. And sometimes you wouldn't believe it, but there are people that have fear of retribution. Those are words they use, like for a district of, for a DD or the rest, because they're afraid their children will lose services if they speak their mind. There's very little truth to these things, but these are things that people actually tell us. So a third party gathering that data, man, you gather good stuff. So now we've got surveys and focus groups. Lori, would you talk just a moment about individual interviews and the importance of those, that they're different from the surveys?
Right. So quite often there are people, as Tom had alluded to, people who are maybe live in your community, live in the community where the district actually sits, but they don't have students in the district, or their students have already gone through the district. And how are they connected to your school or to your DD or to your city? Quite often we find there are large corporations that sit within your city boundaries, within the district limits. So we reach out with your permission to those people, to those CEOs, to those CFOs, to people who run hospital systems or people who might run a large business within your school district or your city. And we do personal interviews with them. Just last week, I spoke to a senator in Pennsylvania because he does work as an advocate for a developmental disability board. They do work together. And so I spoke with him directly on the phone. He gave me 20-25 minutes of his time. And I gathered so much information about that advocacy and the work that he does for that particular, that organization. So we will spend time interviewing people personally that may not show up. They're not going to show up in a community focus group, or they may not take the time to do a survey, but we will take the time to speak with them directly.
And what we found is that, that senator is not coming to a community focus group. No way. But there's two sides of that. One is you gather great data. And the second, let's face it, egos. You have people in your community that have pretty big egos. And rather than going to them with a request each time, we find that just going to them, asking their advice, people love to give advice. The movers and shakers in your community love to give advice. Go to them to ask advice. And this is what that is. It allows them to weigh in. So surveys, focus groups, there's individual interviews. Now we've gathered the data from the community in a really meaningful way. So you have that vision from phase one. Now we have all that stuff from phase two. Now you've got your information. Now we can move forward to phase three. Phase three is where it all starts to come together. Different groups do it different ways. We call them their goals, objectives, and action steps. A goal might be, it's very large, say external communication. Our goal is to communicate our value proposition to our community, our city, whatever. That's our goal. We're going to communicate that out. An objective is something specifically you're going to do. Let's say we gather all the feedback that your website is antiquated, you need a new website. Okay, we're going to build a new website. That's the objective, to drive the goal of external communications. So in the next phase, what we're doing is we take all that information and you derive what are logical goals and logical objectives that are going to get you where your senior leadership said their vision was at the beginning. So you have all your goals and your objectives laid out. That's great. Your senior leadership and then your oversight board, you agree on those goals and objectives, and there's a lot of back and forth to make sure that's all set. The last piece then, where it really comes together, is, and you've got your goals and your objectives. And we advocate doing this last piece. So you have goals and objectives. Now you have a meeting, you have all your senior leaders in a room. These are the doers. This might be your senior leadership and maybe a level right below. And what you do is you get those group in a meeting and you go through the list. You'll say, so goal 1, external communication, objective 1, build a new website. Who in this room logically would take that on? And Jane in the back might say, you know what, that's me, I'm tech, I got that. And we process this with them now. We'd say, okay, Jane, great. Let's work through some logical action steps. For a website, probably the first logical action step would be evaluate current website. Does that make sense? She'd say, yeah. So, well, Jane, when can you have that done? How about October of 22? Super. The next logical step would be to make recommendations for new website. What do you think? She'd say, yeah, that sounds good. When can you have that done? And she would say, she'd think about it and say, how about January of 23? Great. What would be the next logical? Find a company to build it. When could you have that done? How about March of 23? When do we want to have the new website built? And she would say, how about October of 23? What's great about this way is rather than a couple senior leaders imposing this upon your senior staff is involved. And they are logically plugging themselves in where they do it. And they're also logically building out the timeline in front of all of their colleagues. So now we're building this on. That's how that final piece comes together. And the last part of that is as you're doing it, we have up on a whiteboard, everybody that's in that meeting, and John, Bob, Phyllis, Joan, everybody up there. As people take objectives, they get a little check next to their name. And if we're going through this process and Lori has 5 checks and Phil has no checks, as we get going, I'm like, come on, Phil, come on, man, step it up, brother. The idea at the end of the thing, we say many times, many hands make light work. And if the staff can understand that if everybody takes 1, maybe 2 objectives over a 3-year period, this whole thing is going to fly. And it really allows everybody to see the breadth of the whole scope. Does that process make sense? Phil, Lori, anything to add on at this point?
I think what I want to say, and I think I say this from the school end for sure, and as an administrator, as I'm sitting here thinking of all of this, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, how am I going to get this all done? Like there's so many steps to it. There's so much work to be done. Focus groups, survey data, goals and objectives, action steps. And what I can tell you is you don't have to do any of it. That is the beauty when Tom said you have to hire a third-party company to do it. We do all that work for you. So we come in and we do phase 1 and do all the visioning and the SWOT analysis. We come in and do phase 2. We run the surveys, we create the surveys, we gather the data, we disaggregate the data, we create goals and objectives. We come in and do the action step meeting for you. And at the end of it, we present you with 3 different versions to use of this strategic plan. So I know as I would sit and listen to pitches such as this, I'd be like, oh my gosh, who's going to do all this work? Please understand that that's what we're here for. That's what we do. That's where our expertise comes in.
I want to throw one other piece too for your crew, and that there's something called new initiative fatigue. You know, like, and let's face it, our crew is like, oh my gosh, we got another project coming on. Whether you use us or somebody else, a mark of a good strategic plan is it's not a pile of new stuff. It is an organization of the stuff you already have with a couple new things. Your staff has got to understand that it's not a laundry list of new items. You're supposed to put things you're already doing in the plan. You're supposed, it's a prioritization. It's a direction of existing resources. Your crew should, if it's done correctly, feel relief because there are certain things that they're directed toward. Also, what a strategic plan should do is, I'm not sure if anybody has a board out there that the next shiny thing, like, oh my gosh, I saw something shiny. Let's do that. Let's do that initiative. Let's do that. What you're able to say is, well, board, that sounds good. Does that shiny new object match what we have? Does that match specifically what we have in our strategic plan? If so, great. Or you can also say, that is shiny, and that's nice. I appreciate that. If you're going to put this on us, what are you going to take off? Because everything is on the strategic plan. So if you're going to put this big a new initiative on, that's cool. That's your prerogative. But something's got to give. And it allows your leadership to see the direction, and it allows you the ability to say yes if. Yes, we can do that. If. That's a big thing we hear from a lot of people that's really a value. Lori or Phil, anything else on that point? I know that's an important one to you all.
Well, it just what you were saying before, Tom, I've been in districts and even early on in Hudson, we had lists of the strategic plan that we were trying to accomplish. We had a pretty complicated, big, thick binder strategic plan. Then we had the initiatives that the Board of Education wanted accomplished each year. And then we had what the administrative team really thought needed to be done each year. And so we had these three different lists or sets of goals. And it all felt overwhelming because how were we going to juggle all of those components? And really through the process of creating a strategic plan, the same process you outlined, or whether anyone were to work with someone else, would really, really encourage to how is your plan strategically helping you get the things done that you know need to get done to serve those that you're serving. And I think using simple talk or plain language is another component of what we really advocate for. Talk about just very basic steps. Who is going to do what when, as Thomas I'm talking about. You've seen those type of objectives. We're going to review the baseline to establish the perceptions and the criteria so that we can think about creating the professional learning communities. And by the time you're done reading the end of the action steps, you're like, I don't even know what this means. What does it mean? It incorporated everyone's view into one statement, but I have no idea what it means. So we advocate for those action steps that are really clear. Could anyone read that and say, I understand what that means. I understand who's going to do it. And is it really about the things that we think need to be our highest priorities in terms of what we need to get done over the next 3 years? That's the part that becomes exciting when Tom talks about it almost should feel as though, gosh, all this stuff that I was worried about getting done, now I see how we're going to get it done. And that's the part that seems empowering and exciting about it.
Something else to consider about strategic plans, if you're going to do it, if you have a levy or a public initiative in the near or even far horizon, a strategic plan is a great way to organically gather data from your community. Sometimes if you have a levy or something coming up, we need to go out and ask people about the levy. Honestly, the strategic plan, it allows you to organically do that. The idea you're understanding what is important to our community. What do they value? They want new facilities. They want new curriculum, whatever it is. And then when that levy comes around, you're able to simply say that, yes, we need the levy because it supports facilities, it supports curriculum, or whatever it is. It's an organic way to engage your population in a way which doesn't seem as though it's linked to the levy, because it's honestly not. We know that if you have a levy coming up, the worst time to start talking about your levy is when you're on the ballot. You need to be communicating that well before you're on the ballot. And a strategic plan is a way to gather data to do that. Any major points we haven't hit yet, Lori or Phil, you'd like to hit regarding strategic plan and the overarching view?
I don't think so. I think you covered it.
Okay. Our objective is to do these things in 25 minutes or less, just to give you a brief idea about this and other topics. We have other topics coming up in the future. We have how to build a positive culture, a culture of appreciation, crisis communication, some other cool things as well. Hope you join us for those. Does anybody have any questions about strategic planning, about how it works, thoughts you guys have, just things you tried in the past?
I was recently at the executive development presentation you did for OACB. So some of this information was a little bit of a refresher, I guess. But each time I hear you guys speak, I pick up another tip or another idea. So I appreciate just all the insights and any tidbits of information. I feel like every time I see you guys, I just write as fast as I can to try to capture it all. So thank you.
Well, reach out to any of us. We'll sit and talk with you. You don't need to take fast and furious notes. We'll help you out.
So we didn't make you cry at the crisis communication one. You were okay at that one?
Yeah, so my job is community outreach, and it's a nice way of public relations. And so it's always, you sit on the edge of your seat because all these what ifs could potentially be at my door any day. But I very much agree with you that if you don't use it, you lose it. So oddly enough, it was like just outside of my comfort zone, makes your blood pump a little bit, makes you think. I love the hypotheticals than the real thing though. So the exercise was fun.
Oh, cool. We're actually just talking about right now. We did one at the Ohio Association of County Boards. We're going to be doing the next. We have these webinars. The next one's actually going to be on crisis communication. We took a whole group through crisis communication scenarios, and it was a lot of fun. It always, as you said, it gets your heart pumping a little bit. It's a little spooky, but you gotta practice. And any thoughts or anything else regarding regarding strategic planning? Well, as an utterly shameless plug, if anybody would like strategic planning, this is what we do. How to build a positive culture in your organization. We'd be happy to help. And in communication services as well. We act as the outsourced communication wing for school districts, boards of DD, cities. If you have anything to communicate, we're the people to help. So everybody, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. So appreciate it, and have a wonderful day.